Carol Burnett was born on April 26, 1933, in San Antonio, Texas, into a world defined by instability and neglect. Her parents were both alcoholics. Her father worked at a movie theater but couldn't hold a job for long, and her mother was emotionally absent, lost in drink. Both would eventually die from alcohol-related illness. By the time Carol was a toddler, she had already absorbed what it felt like to be unwanted, learning early that laughter could serve as armor against a world that offered her very little warmth. When her parents gave up entirely on raising her, she was taken in by her maternal grandmother, Mabel White. In 1940, the two left Texas and moved to Hollywood, though there was no glamour waiting for them. They lived in a single cramped room in a rundown boarding house, surrounded by addicts, mentally ill tenants, and people barely clinging to survival on welfare. Carol and her grandmother got by on $20 a week, barely enough for food, let alone dreams. But Mabel gave Carol something her parents never had: unconditional love. In the middle of that chaos, Carol invented an escape. She created a pretend twin sister named Karen, confident, beautiful, always smiling, and made her so convincing that even the other tenants believed she existed. She would run up the fire escape, change clothes, change her hair, and reappear as Karen before slipping back into herself. That the adults around her believed it speaks to both her raw talent and to how desperately everyone in that building needed something joyful to hold on to. Every Saturday, Carol and her grandmother went to the movies. Tickets cost 25 cents for two, more than 10% of their weekly income. For those few hours, the peeling paint and the fear melted away. But when the credits rolled, survival came back. They couldn't afford toilet paper at home, so they quietly took it from the theater bathroom. They weren't ashamed. They were desperate. Even at 7 years old, Carol understood what it meant to hunger for more than food. One afternoon, sitting in that darkened theater, she heard Johnny Weissmuller's famous Tarzan yell echo through the room. It hit her like electricity. She began mimicking it obsessively at home, perfecting every pitch and rhythm, without realizing she was training her voice and building the kind of breath control most singers spend years developing. That yell would later bring audiences to their feet during her live shows. What started as a child's imitation became one of the first tools in her comedy arsenal. By the time Carol finished high school, her dream was journalism, partly because her mother had always wanted to be a writer, and Carol felt she owed it to her to finish what couldn't be started. UCLA was the goal, but when the time came, she didn't have the $50 needed for tuition. Then, without explanation, a stranger paid it for her. No strings, no name left behind, just enough to change her life. At UCLA, one elective theater class turned everything upside down. In that room, she wasn't poor or invisible. She was funny, loud, and completely alive. Her professors noticed. So did her classmates. She could sing, act, and make people laugh in the same breath, and suddenly journalism seemed too small for the person she was becoming. She switched majors. It was risky, but for the first time, she wasn't just surviving, she was dreaming. That risk paid off fast. At the end of her freshman year, she was named Most Promising Newcomer in UCLA's theater program. As a junior in 1954, working as an usherette for 65 cents an hour, Carol attended a party in San Diego where she met a millionaire shipbuilder from La Jolla. She wasn't there to network. She was stuffing hors d'oeuvres into her purse to bring home to her grandmother. When the man heard she dreamed of Broadway but couldn't even afford tuition, he made her an offer that seemed too good to be true: $1,000 each for her and her boyfriend Don Soroyan, with 3 conditions. She could never reveal his name. The money could only be used to get to New York, and if she made it, she had to help others do the same. With $2,000 between them, Carol and Don packed up and headed east. She had never been further than Texas, and she didn't know a soul in New York. She said later she didn't know enough to be scared. They checked into the Algonquin Hotel at $9 a night, too expensive, and the money started disappearing fast. At one point, Carol broke down crying during a collect call home. Then a radio announcement stopped her cold. A hurricane named Carol was moving up the coast. She took it as a sign and decided to stay. She soon found herself at the Rehearsal Club, an old boarding house for young women trying to break into the arts. For $18 a week, she got a cot in a shared room with 4 other actresses, 1 bathroom, and 1 closet. To her, it was paradise. She had been sleeping on a couch back home. To make ends meet, She worked as a hat-check girl at night and auditioned during the day. In March 1955, the girls put on a show called the Rehearsal Club Review and mailed invitations to agents and producers. Big names showed up, including Marlene Dietrich, and doors began opening. Her first real break came from Something Absurd, a comedic love song about John Foster Dulles, the stiff and humorless U.S. Secretary of State. She performed it with such perfect commitment that audiences went wild. She was invited onto The Jack Paar Show, then The Ed Sullivan Show. On January 6, 1957, she stepped onto the Sullivan stage with shaking knees and left with the crowd howling. That ridiculous ballad turned her into the talk of New York comedy. Over the next few years, Carol kept grinding, small roles, guest appearances, and a supporting part alongside Butter Hackett in a short-lived sitcom called Stanley. Then in 1959, everything shifted. She landed the lead in Once Upon a Mattress, an off-Broadway musical that moved to Broadway, where she played Princess Winifred. Loud, clumsy, nothing like a fairy tale princess. The show exploded. She earned her first Tony nomination. And on June 22, 1959, exactly 5 years after receiving that mysterious loan, Carol and Don repaid the full $2,000. The millionaire never responded. He stayed anonymous to the end. When Carol eventually left the cast in June 1960, the show collapsed within a week. Her replacement lasted only 8 performances before it closed completely. She had become irreplaceable. From 1959 to 1962, she became a television powerhouse on The Gary Moore Show, winning her first Emmy in 1962. Her cleaning lady character became iconic, and the show's unrehearsed warm-ups with live audiences planted the seed for what her own show would later become. Then came the Carnegie Hall special with Julie Andrews in 1962, a pairing CBS had initially resisted, which won 3 major awards including an Emmy. And on September 11, 1967, the Carol Burnett Show premiered, and television changed forever. For 11 straight seasons, it pulled in 30 million viewers every single week. Time magazine named it one of the 100 best television shows of all time. TV Guide placed it at number 17. It won 25 Primetime Emmy Awards across writing, musical material, choreography, and Best Variety Series. It was also one of the first variety shows to feature live comedy skits before a studio audience, a format that went on to directly inspire Saturday Night Live. Behind the scenes, the chemistry between Carol and her cast was unlike anything else on television. Harvey Korman was once so disgruntled during a season that he slammed his dressing room door in Carol's face and told her he wasn't happy there. She called his agent and fired him. Over the weekend, he begged for another chance. She agreed on one condition, that Monday morning, he skip and whistle down the hallway at CBS. And that's exactly what he did. She had a plaque made for his dressing room door that read Mr. Happy-Go-Lucky. Tim Conway operated differently. He never went all out in rehearsals, saving his best material for live tapings, which meant every performance was unpredictable. During a now legendary sketch, Conway told a long, rambling story about a circus elephant, while Carol, Vicki Lawrence, and Dick Van Dyke struggled visibly to stay in character. By the end, even Vicki cracked, and her unexpected comeback line sent the entire cast into hysterical laughter, Conway included. Those moments became the soul of the show, raw, real, and utterly unscripted. In 1977, something happened that shook Carol deeply. One episode of the family sketch, in which she played Eunice Higgins, a woman crushed by disappointment and failed dreams, abandoned all comedy. The sketch, called The Gong Show, depicted Eunice believing that performing on a talent show would finally launch her to fame. Instead, the judges mocked her. Carol played it completely straight, no funny accent, no exaggeration, nothing to soften the blow. By the end of the taping, the crew was close to tears. When it aired, the camera pulled back slowly on Eunice's tear-streaked face as the lights dimmed. No music, no laughter, just heartbreak. Critics praised it enormously, but Carol never watched it again, not once in 47 years. In a 2010 interview, she said it was too real. Eunice's pain felt like her own, because it was. She had grown up in poverty, knowing exactly what it felt like to dream big and be laughed at. The sketch later led to a TV movie in 1982 and a spin-off sitcom, Mama's Family. The original episode remained legendary. Carol's personal life carried its own weight throughout all of this. Her first marriage to Don Soroyan ended after his career stalled while Hayes soared, and after the death of his daughter from a previous relationship shattered him. They separated on Christmas Day in 1959 and divorced in 1962. Don battled depression and alcoholism until his death in 1990. Her second marriage, to TV producer Joe Hamilton in 1963, gave her 3 daughters, Carrie, Jody, and Erin, but eventually collapsed under the strain of their careers in a family tragedy that would define Carol's hardest years. In the late 1970s, her daughter Carrie fell into severe drug addiction at just 13, using cocaine, marijuana, and other substances. Carol sent her to rehab after rehab. At one point, Carrie ran away from a Texas facility. Carol had to make the hardest decision of her life, and Carrie hated her for it. But Carol later said you have to love them enough to let them hate you. Carrie eventually got sober at 17. They reconciled, grew closer than ever, acted together in films and television, and co-wrote a play called Hollywood Arms based on Carol's own life. Then in 2002, Carrie died from lung cancer that had spread to her brain. She was 38 years old and never saw the play open on stage. Carol found love again in the late 1990s with Brian Miller, a drummer 23 years her junior. They married in 2001. Just 2 months later, Carrie died. Brian helped Carol survive the darkest period of her life and encouraged her to finish Hollywood Arms. They have been together ever since. In later years, Carol also stepped in to raise her grandson Dylan after her youngest daughter Erin battled a lengthy addiction crisis that spanned nearly 2 decades and 8 stints in rehab. Even as she was navigating family heartbreak, her career never stopped. In 2022, she appeared in the final season of Better Call Saul at 89 years old, delivering one of the most quietly gripping performances of the entire series. In 2024, at 91, she starred in Palm Royal on Apple TV+, earning an Emmy nomination for Outstanding Supporting Actress in a Comedy Series, making her the oldest female nominee in Emmy history. 7 decades in, Carol Burnett was still showing the world exactly who she was.